Hello and welcome back, and today I'm going to show you exactly why I am no longer growing potatoes in the ground. I'm also going to be picking some potatoes in one of my buckets at the end of the video, so make sure you stay until the end. I'm also going to talk about some of the other ways that you can grow potatoes, because the way I'm growing them is not the only way. So I still grow potatoes in the ground, here, and there's some secondaries. Because they're in the shade, they're going to be ready a bit later. But mostly, on the most part, if you've seen my video about planting them, I'm growing in 30 litre buckets. And the reason I'm doing this is because this soil here, in this vegetable patch, has got blight in it. And another reason is because you get more out of the buckets and out of bags. But I'll speak about that afterwards. And blight is a soil-borne disease. So if you ever had blight in your potatoes, I'd recommend you do a bit of crop rotation and plant them in a different bed that they've never been planted in before. Or I recommend you growing in buckets where you can control the growing medium by using some bought compost or bought in topsoil. And this bed I grew last year. I grew a lot of potatoes here and they didn't do very well. They got some diseases, especially blight, and that means there's blight in this soil, and I don't know whether it's in the rest of my soil, so I'm going to give the soil a break for a few years by growing most of my potatoes in pots, which should hopefully help eliminate the blight from my soil. And these here are the buckets that I'm growing in, and these are 30 litre recycled plastic buckets, I think. And I've got these Charlotte potatoes. This one, as you can see, has already been harvested, and I've planted some carrot seeds in there so I can get a second crop out of this bucket. But I did try and film this video before, but it was pouring with rain and the footage wasn't very good, so I've refilmed it to try and let you get a good video out of this. And yeah, so these potatoes, what I did was I filled it about halfway maybe. I filled it halfway or a third, put the seed potatoes in, covered them with some more manure-y, strong compost, and then I let them grow. And when they started to grow and they got to sort of a small height, I put some grass clippings and hay around them to earth them up without having to use more compost, because then they're not really using the nutrients from that compost. It's mainly to stop the potatoes growing green, which is why I used grass clippings rather than compost, because it saved money, and we didn't have much compost at that point because it was the start of the UK coronavirus lockdown. So these here are grow bags, and these are another great way that you can grow potatoes. And these we planted about a couple of weeks ago because we had some Pembrokeshire new potatoes that we bought. We had a sack of them and we didn't use them all in time, and they all went to seed, so we've used most of them to grow in bags like these. And these are an excellent way of doing it because they're often bigger than 30 litres, so you can fit more in them. And in these, what we did is we tried an experiment where we did 3 potatoes, seed potatoes, covered them with soil, and in different places we planted another 3 potatoes as we went up, and this should hopefully give us a bigger crop, and hopefully these will give us tasty potatoes, just as tasty as the Pembrokeshire potatoes we got. And next to these, I've recycled this old blue bucket here to grow potatoes. This is the one we're going to be picking today, because they're starting to get some brown dots on them and going a bit yellow, which I'm not sure why, and the plants never really did well because they got frosted and they didn't send up new shoots. So we're just going to pick them for new potatoes, and we're going to have them for dinner tonight in a lovely, I think it's a beef stew we're having for dinner tonight, so we're going to have some new potatoes with it. And these should be lovely. These are Charlotte then, just like my other ones in the other buckets, which make sort of a longer, slightly bigger new potato, but they're lovely. I love the taste of Charlotte, and they're quite a smooth, sort of creamy potato as well. And so the second reason why it's good to grow in pots or in containers, and why I'm no longer growing in the ground, is because they're much less likely to be eaten by all the types of worms and slugs that eat potatoes. And this is because they're raised up, and I drilled holes in the bottom so the worms from the ground could get in, but I also drilled holes that won't let any other pests in that will eat them. This is great because the first crop I got, which I filmed but I couldn't really upload because it wasn't really good enough, the first crop I got was amazing. We had some perfect potatoes, really quite big as well, and I'm not sure how big the ones I'm harvesting later on in this video are going to be, but hopefully they'll be big enough to eat, and if they're in a stew it doesn't really matter anyway. homegrown is still better than buying from a shop because of the environmental consequence. And as you'll know, growing your own food is really good for the environment if you watched my video that came out on Monday. And another reason to grow in containers is because if you use bought compost or topsoil, it's probably going to be quite good compost. And what you can do once you finish picking the potatoes, which is what I'm going to do today, once I've picked them at the end of the video, is I'm going to take out all the plants and bits of leaves and old potatoes, and I'm going to use the compost to mulch my beds between the plants that are already there to try and add nutrients back into my soil. And this is a great way of doing it, especially if you use peat-free compost, because it'll be really good for the environment anyway. And this compost from the shop, it's so much better than the compost that I make, because I'm not very good at making really good compost. I make a lot of it, but I can't make much good stuff unless it's in my wormery, and my wormery is quite good at making compost, and that's what you can use as well. You can use your homegrown compost or homemade compost and wormery compost to grow in these bags. So it's good, because you might think it's wasting compost by using in buckets, but you don't have to bin it at the end. You just use it and tip it onto your beds, mulch it, and this will feed the soil. And potatoes over here in the pots are much easier to harvest and pick, because you can just tip it out into a wheelbarrow and they all just fall out basically. You just rip some of the roots apart and you find them all really easily. Whereas, for example, over here where I've got potatoes in the ground, I'm going to have to pull these out, and that's a lot more effort than just tipping out a bucket like I said earlier. And I did these the no dig approach, where you just dig a hole and put the potato in rather than digging a trench. But if you would no dig as well, if you weren't no dig, sorry, you have to get a fork in and dig them out, which is even more effort than tipping out a bucket. And now I'm going to pick these potatoes. So let's get out what we need. So what I'll need is some secateurs and a wheelbarrow, and that's it. And then I'll tip these out. Oh, I might get a crate as well, or a truck, to go and put the potatoes in afterwards. I'll do that as well, but I'll show you me getting all that out now. You can also use a sieve like this, and what this will do is it'll save you getting your hands so dirty from digging through all that soil, and you can just put it in here, sieve it out, and you'll be left with all your nice potatoes left in there. So I'm starting off by removing all of the grass mulch that I had on top, and this is to go and put it in the compost afterwards, so that it can be turned into a useful mulch later on, and so that it makes it easier for me to pick the potatoes out. I'm now just cutting all the stalks off using a pair of secateurs, and these will also go into the compost bin probably. And as you can see a potato slightly at the start already, but this just shows how easy it is to be able to just pull them out of the bucket. And I'm just taking the seed potato out here, and that'll go in the compost as well. There's my first tiny little one. A lot of these are quite small and funny shapes as well, so excuse how odd some of them look. I just touched a squishy seed potato, that's why I looked a bit disgusted. There's my first three. I didn't get a huge harvest from this, but they were enough to go into a stew like I said we were going to have. And they were actually really quite delicious. So now I'm just picking the ones that I find as I rummage through. And as you can see, it's quite a strong root ball on the potatoes. And normally people think that most of the roots is just the potatoes' tubers, but actually potatoes have quite a lot of roots, such as the ones that you can see. And they actually filled that bucket, and that bucket was a bit small for 3 seed potatoes. So ideally, maybe next time I'll put 2 in instead of 3, and it'll be a bit better on space and I won't get such a small harvest. But that's all I've got out of the whole thing. And I'm now just left with the compost ready to mulch my beds. So as you can see from those clips in the voiceover, I've harvested them now, and we're left with this really rich compost. This is rich because you might think it's not rich because I've already grown in them. But this was like a manure-y sort of enriched compost that I bought in bags earlier on in spring. And I've taken all the sludgy seed potatoes out, they'll go in the compost bin. But most of the roots, see, earthworms, they love these roots. The roots are some of the best organic matter for your soils and for the worms. And that's because they've got a high water content and they can absorb a lot, which is really, really good for soil. And yeah, so I'm going to show you now. I'm going to go and put it on one of my beds. I'm not sure which one yet, but I'll decide afterwards. So I've decided to put it here in my soft fruit bed here, and this will help all my currants and my raspberries. And now let's do the fun part, and let's put the compost on that bed. So I'm going to move this small little fence out of the way that I've got, and I'm going to go and tip it in, use my wheelbarrow, and I'll spread it out using my hands. And this here, this is really, really good. What I'll be doing here is I'll just spread it out like this around all of these soft fruit plants, and it'll add some really well needed nutrients here, because I haven't put compost on this bed for a while, and probably about 5 years actually, and these fruit have been doing just fine, but I think they'll do even better with mulches like this throughout the year. And now to go and get everything that's going to go in the compost bins and put it in there, and then this will probably be the end of my video today, and I really hope you've enjoyed watching it. Here it is. So now we're going to say bye to that stuff, or that byproduct, or the waste material you could call it. We're going to say bye to that until it comes out as a nice black rich compost. Here we are. Next time we see that, it'll be some rich, nice rich compost. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Please make sure you like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.